The girl didn't move when the snow slid off the cabin's roof and thudded into the drift below. She sat on the split-log porch, chin tucked down, veil stiff with frost. Her hands were folded in her lap, like she was waiting for something. Or maybe for nothing at all. Inside, smoke curled slow from the stone chimney. A man moved in there, big, silent, not much fond of company. She didn't know his name yet. He hadn't asked for hers. But let's go back. To the fire. To the smell of flesh. To the people who told her she'd never be wanted by any man again 5 weeks earlier, when the nights were still filled with elk cries and the mountain wind tore through the trees like it wanted to kill something. A wagon limped into the canyon. Trail beneath Bitter Creek Pass. It didn't belong there. It was too far north, too far wild. There were no towns within a day's ride, and only one soul who lived out this far. Samuel Cutter, the man the army stopped trying to recruit after the war because he wouldn't answer to anyone. He was splitting pine that morning, stacking it. Under a lean-to, shirt sleeves rolled and his face hard with winter and solitude. He heard the wagon long before he saw it, the iron-rimmed wheels straining through rock and mud. Then came the snorting of the horse, and a man cussing under his breath. The wagon stopped in front of his property. Cutter didn't move. He just stood there, axe in hand, jaw set. A man stepped down. Gaunt. Nervous. His coat was military issue, but faded. He had a red scarf wound tied around his neck and the kind of twitch in his shoulders that made Cutter's spine stiffen. "We don't want no trouble," the man said quickly. "Just a warm spot to sleep. Maybe a dry place for the girl." He looked back into the wagon. "She can sleep in the barn if you don't want her in the house." The man was lying. Cutter could hear it in his voice, smell it under the civility. He narrowed his eyes toward the wagon. A girl stepped down, slow, careful, like she'd been told not to show her pain. She wore a bonnet pulled low over her face and a shawl wrapped tight. Cutter couldn't see her eyes. He didn't have to. She radiated something broken. "Storm will trap you by nightfall," Cutter said flatly. "You can stay in the barn. You'll move on come morning." The man nodded too fast. "Appreciate it, mister. You won't regret it." The snow came. Hard that night. Cutter stood at the window of his cabin, looking out toward the barn. Something felt off. He didn't like the way the man looked at her. He didn't like the way the girl never met anyone's eyes. Just after midnight, he heard the horse. A quiet trot. Not the wagon horse, something else. Cutter grabbed his rifle. He stepped outside, boots crunching in the new snow. The barn door was ajar. The girl was curled in the hayloft. Alone. Her bonnet beside her, and her face turned toward the wall like she was hiding. No sign of the man. She flinched when he opened the door, her body shrinking like a whipped dog. "Where is he?" Cutter asked. No answer. Just shallow breathing. Cutter's voice softened. "He leave you here?" Still, nothing. But her hand lifted slowly, and she pointed to the ground. To the empty spot where a man should have been sleeping. He walked over, knelt beside her. And that's when the firelight from his lantern caught her face, half of it, from temple to jaw, was puckered and warped. Burned. Ugly in the way that makes decent men swallow and cruel men smirk. Cutter didn't say anything. He just set the lantern down and pulled his coat from his shoulders, draping it around her. She whispered then. Just one word. Bride. By morning, the man and the horse were long gone. So was the trail, buried under 6 inches of fresh powder. Cutter didn't ask more questions. Didn't press. Just gave her his old bed and moved to the floor. She didn't eat much. Didn't speak. Didn't show her face again. For 3 days, she barely moved. Just curled up with the coat he'd given her and stared at the fire like it might answer some question she didn't have words for. On the 4th day, he caught her outside with a hatchet, trying to split wood. Her fingers raw, the blade trembling in her hands. "You'll lose a thumb that way," he said. She flinched, but didn't stop. He took the hatchet gently from her hands and showed her the grip. "Thumb here. Rock forward with your weight. You're not hacking a man, you're teaching the log to split." For the first time, she looked at him. Her eyes were blue, sharp as river ice. She still didn't speak. He handed her the axe. She swung again. Better this time. He didn't tell her she was doing good. Didn't coddle. Just nodded once and walked back toward the cabin. That night, she left a folded piece of paper beside his chair. It wasn't written in ink, but in burned wood soot. "I didn't know he would sell me." Below it, a name, Clara, Winter deepened. Clara started cooking, cleaning. She still didn't talk much, but Cutter didn't need words. He knew loneliness when he saw it. Knew pain, too, the kind that rewires a person. Then one night, a knock at the cabin door shattered the calm. 3 men stood outside, armed. One of them wore the same red scarf. "Evening, mister," the one in front said. "We're looking for a girl. About this high. Scars on her face. Property of a man named Ridge." Cutter stared at them, silent. "She's in there, ain't she?" the man said. "She's a runaway. Ridge wants his money back." Cutter glanced behind him, to the firelight, where Clara sat very still, her face pale under her veil. That he looked back at the men. "Never seen her," he said, and closed the door. Then he slid the bolt shut and waited. The storm rolled in fast, wind howling through the canyon like something wounded. Cutter stood at the window, rifle across his arms, eyes tracking the tree line beyond the barn. He didn't know if they'd try tonight, or if they'd wait until morning, but he knew. Ridge knew the type. He wouldn't leave without what he thought was his. Clara didn't speak, just sat cross-legged near the fire, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face hidden, as always, but her shoulders were rigid. Listening, waiting, Cutter poured 2 cups of coffee, set one down beside her. She didn't move. "They'll come back," he said. "You know that?" She nodded once. "I don't reckon I can stop all of them," he added. She turned toward him, her veil swaying. "Then why did you lie?" Her voice was soft, dusty, like it hadn't been used in weeks. Cutter shrugged. "Didn't sit right. Them calling you property." Clara's fingers tightened on her dress. "They branded me like cattle. Burned my cheek, so I wouldn't fetch a bride price." He looked at her, but said nothing. "I was 16, she added. "My step-uncle did it. Said I wasn't pretty enough to matter anyway." Her breath caught. "Then Ridge bought me for 2 mules and a crate of rifles." Silence settled between them. Cutter stirred the fire. "And he just left you here." Clara looked down. "He figured the snow would kill me. Or you would." He let out a slow breath. "That why you tried to chop wood in the dark? Figured you wouldn't last long." Her lip twitched, something between a frown and a smirk. "Didn't think you'd care if I bled." "Well," Cutter said, rubbing the scar on his forearm, "I don't have much patience for bleeding. But I hate cowards more." By morning, the men hadn't come back. But Cutter knew they weren't far. The tracks around the creek had been fresh. Too fresh that he saddled the mule, packed jerky and cartridges, and loaded the Henry rifle. "I need to make a run into Dead Horse Junction," he said. Back by nightfall, Clara stood at the cabin door. "Why?" Cutter paused. "Because if they do come back, I don't want to be outgunned." He didn't mention the other reason. The old friend he knew was still sheriff out that way. Not the best man, but not a coward either. "You'll be safe here," he said. "Bolt the door behind me. Don't open it unless I say your name." Clara nodded, but her face had gone pale again, and her hands were shaking. He almost said something. Almost, but instead, he swung onto the saddle and rode off through the snow. Dead Horse Junction was little more than a row of false front buildings, and one leaning saloon with broken windows. But Sheriff Amos Doyle still kept his boots on the desk and his Winchester behind the bar. "Cutter," Doyle said, chewing a toothpick. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you'd frozen into the mountains years ago." Cutter nodded once. "Need help?" Doyle sat up. "Hell, that's serious. 3 men. One of them goes by Ridge. Says he owns a girl I'm protecting." Doyle's jaw tightened. "That bastard's been buying women all the way up from Cheyenne. Knows the gaps in the law like the back of his hand." Cutter folded his arms. "You gonna do something about it?" The sheriff didn't answer right away. Just looked out toward the plains. "If she's run off, technically she's his. On paper. Unless what? "Unless you marry her," Doyle said. "Then she's your wife. No one can touch her without your consent." Cutter blinked. "You serious?" "Serious as gunpowder," Doyle said. "Ain't right. But it's the law. A husband's rights outrank a buyer's, especially in Wyoming territory." Cutter was silent for a long moment. "She's a girl, Amos. Burned up and broken. Barely trusts her own shadow. I ain't saying you touch her. I'm saying you protect her. Same thing you're doing already, just with papers to prove it." Cutter ran a hand over his beard. The cold wind clawed under the door. Then he said, "Draw it up." Back at the cabin, Clara paced the floor in silence. The woodpile was stacked. The stew was simmering, but her mind wouldn't settle. Something had changed in Cutter. She'd seen it in his eyes before he left. Not fear, but purpose. She didn't want to hope. Hope had betrayed her before. But that night, just before the wind died down, she heard the crunch of boots outside. Then the sound of a latch. Cutter stepped in. Snow on his shoulders. Rifle slung low. Clara rose, unsure. Her hand hovered near the poker by the hearth, just in case he saw her worry, and gave a tired half-smile. Relax, he said. It's still me. She nodded, but didn't sit. He pulled something from his coat pocket and held it out. A slip of paper, smudged with official ink. The letters careful and stiff. Certificate of marriage. Samuel J. Cutter and Clara Mae Weston. Clara stared at it, then back at him. I didn't ask you for this, she whispered. No, he said. You didn't. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't even know what I am. Cutter stepped closer. Quiet. Calm. I know what you ain't. You ain't property. You ain't livestock. And you sure as hell ain't someone I'm gonna leave to a man like Ridge. Clara's chin trembled. She looked down at the paper again, then turned and walked toward the window. Outside, the snow had started falling again. Gentle. Soft. You really mean to keep me safe? She asked. He looked at her. I aim to. She let out a shaky breath. Then, for the first time, she lifted her veil and looked him in the eye, and he didn't flinch. The next morning, Cutter awoke to silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind where even the birds know to stay stilled. He swung his feet to the floorboards and reached for the rifle before his boots. The hearth still glowed faintly from Clara's early fire, but she wasn't in the cabin. Her cup sat warm on the table, steam curling upward. He moved fast. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open, rifle ready. But it was just Clara, standing in the loft where she'd first slept, staring out the high window. Snow clung to the edge of her shawl, and her breath fogged the glass. They're here, she said softly. Not turning, he joined her, and through the pines beyond the trail. He saw it 2.4 riders, one leading a pack horse, the red scarf flapping like a wound against the snow. Ridge. They didn't come charging. No shouting. Just the sound of hooves crunching cold earth as they came up the slope. Calm, confident, entitled, Cutter stepped outside and waited by the post. Rifle slung low. Coat unbuttoned to move easier if needed. The lead horse stopped 10 paces away. Ridge sat like a man who'd never lost a thing in his life. Sharp boots, polished spurs, a pistol too clean for a man who claimed to ride through rough country. She's mine, Ridge said, voice cold and certain. She's not, Cutter replied. Ridge gave a little scoff. You think a slip of paper means anything to me? You marry her out here like some preacher in the dirt, and I'm just supposed to walk away? Cutter didn't blink. Exactly that. The men behind Ridge shifted. One looked nervous. One didn't look like he had enough brains to be nervous. Ridge smiled. She's marked. Burned. I had the decency to take her when no one else would. You think you're the first fool tried to make her clean again. At that, Cutter's voice dropped an octave. Steady. Final. She never needed cleaning. Just a place to heal. Ridge's smile faded. You a religious man, Cutter? No. Then you better start talking to God, Ridge said, reaching for his holster. The movement was quick, but not quicker than Cutter's. The Henry leveled before Ridge's fingers closed on the grip. I wouldn't, Cutter said. Quietly, the barrel didn't move. His eyes didn't blink. Ridge froze. Behind them, the wind whispered across the snow like it was holding its breath. The silence dragged. Then, the youngest of Ridge's men, the nervous one, shifted in his saddle and said, She's not worth a war. Ridge whipped his head toward him. You say that again? But the boy wasn't looking at Ridge anymore. He was looking past him. At the cabin. At the girl in the window. At her scars. I got a sister, he said, voice shaking. Burned in a stovetop accident when she was a kid. She thought no man'd ever love her either. Ridge growled. You shut your damn mouth. I ain't gonna kill over this. The boy snapped, louder now. Not for a man who brands women and sells them. The man next to him spat and rode off. Just turned his horse and went. That left Ridge alone. The pack horse pawed the ground nervously as the leader looked around. Realizing he was now just a man with a red scarf and no army, Cutter lowered the rifle. Just a hair. Right out. Ridge sneered. You think this is over? No, Cutter said. I think you're over. He left without another word. Snow covered his tracks by midday. Cutter came back into the cabin, rifle still in hand. Clara stood there, her face uncovered now, eyes wide with something she hadn't let herself feel in years. "Did you shoot him?" she asked. "No, why not?" Cutter looked down at the floorboards. "Because that'd be the easy end to a hard story." She nodded slowly, almost understanding. Then she asked, almost in a whisper, "Would you have?" Cutter finally met her eyes. "If he'd reached for that pistol," he said. "Yes." That night, they ate in silence. The stew was good. Cutter had chopped extra wood. She'd sewn a patch into his worn sleeve. There wasn't anything to say. Not really. Just the fire, the wind, and the slow unfurling of something fragile between them. Later, as he sat at the table fixing a broken latch, Clara came to stand beside him. She touched his hand gently, not grabbing, just resting hers. Over it, he looked up. "I don't know what this is," she said softly, "or what I am to you, but I want to stay, if that's all right." Cutter gave the smallest of nods. "You already have." Then she bent, slowly, and kissed his cheek. Just once, her scar brushed his skin. And he didn't flinch. The days passed. Quiet after Ridge rode out, like the mountain itself had exhaled. The snow softened. The wind lost its teeth. And the silence inside the cabin turned from tense to warm. Cutter didn't say much. He never had. But now, Clara matched his pace. Not with fear, but familiarity. She'd started humming when she swept the floor, sometimes even singing under her breath when she made coffee. Her voice was small, worn down by years of silence, but it had weight. Cutter found himself listening for it each morning like a man. Waiting for the sun, she still didn't sleep through the night. He'd hear her rise sometimes, soft-footed across the creaky boards, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and staring out the window. But she was healing point one night. Cutter sat, whittling on the porch, shaping a bit of pine into a small horse. Clara stepped outside, wrapped in his coat, and sat beside him without a word. He handed her the carving. "For you," he said. Clara turned it in her hands, gently. "Why a horse?" "You're restless like one," he said, "but strong. And you don't spook easy anymore." She smiled, real this time. "You think I'm strong? You're still here, ain't you?" She held the carving to her chest like it was something precious. And for the first time since she'd come, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about the fire, about what it did to me." Cutter didn't move. Just let her speak. "I used to pray to die before I saw my reflection each morning. I'd wash, and I wouldn't look. I stopped caring if I was clean. I stopped thinking I was worth saving." Her voice trembled. "Then you saw me, all of me, and didn't look away." Cutter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She looked up at him. "I'm not afraid of being touched anymore." That caught him. He turned toward her, slow, like she might vanish if he moved too fast, but Clara didn't flinch. She reached for his hand, brought it to her face, and pressed his rough fingers to the side where the skin was raised and ugly. "See," she whispered. "It's just skin." Cutter's voice was barely a rasp. "I never saw it as anything else." Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. "I want you to kiss me," she said, "where they tried to make me unlovable." He hesitated, not out of fear, but reverence. Then he leaned in, slowly, and kissed her scar. Soft, not rushed, not desperate, and when he pulled back, Clara was crying. Not because it hurt, because it didn't. They didn't speak of marriage. Again, not in legal terms. The paper stayed folded on the mantel, gathering soot. But something truer had passed between them that night than anything ink could hold. They lived slow, with intention, mending tools, feeding the mule, cutting wood. Clara started wearing her face uncovered. When Cutter rode into Dead Horse for supplies 2 weeks later, she came with him, veil off, chin high. No one said a word. People watched. Sure, but no one dared insult a woman who stood that proud beside a man like Cutter. Even Sheriff Doyle tipped his hat and said nothing more than, "Good to see you out and about, Mrs. Cutter." She smiled politely. "Thank you, Sheriff." And Cutter noticed. She didn't look away from anyone. On the ride back up the mountain, snow flurries danced, like feathers around them. Clara tugged the blanket tighter around her and laughed as the wind lifted her hair. "You ever think you'd end up with a wife like me?" she asked, teasing. Cutter glanced sideways. "Didn't figure I'd end up with anyone." Clara grinned. "You got lucky." He smirked. "I got something." She turned in the saddle. her smile fading gently into something more serious. You saved me, Samuel. He looked forward again, scanning the ridgeline. No, he said. You did that yourself. I just gave you the space to remember how. They rode in silence after that. Not awkward, not heavy, just still, like the land around them, scarred, quiet, and alive in a way few people ever really understood. 3 years later, the child toddled across the porch on unsteady legs, her chubby fingers reaching for the carved wooden horse that sat near the steps. The wind caught her bonnet, tugging it sideways, and she let out a squeal of protest. Before she could tumble down the stairs, a pair of strong hands scooped her up. Easy now, little bird, Samuel said, lifting the girl onto his hip. Your mama's gonna have my hide if you fall off that porch. From inside the cabin, Clara called out. She listens to you more than she listens to me. That's because she knows I bribe better, he said with a grin, pulling a strip of dried apple from his pocket. The girl grabbed it with a fierce little tug and stuffed it in her mouth. Clara stepped into the doorway, her figure framed by soft evening light. Her face was bare, no scarf, no veil, and her auburn hair had grown out longer, softer. The scar was still there, always would be. But no one who met her now remembered it first. They remembered her laugh, her stubbornness, her gentleness, with wounded animals and lost children, and most of all, her strength. Cutter still didn't talk much, never would. But what he gave her, in silence, in steadiness, had filled every broken place in her until she didn't feel like shards anymore. She walked out and took the child from his arms, brushing a kiss to his jaw. Stage came today, she said. Ridge is dead. Samuel's face didn't change, but she saw the flicker of thought behind his eyes. Where? Cheyenne jail. Stabbed by one of his own. They say he bled out in a corner with no name on his lips. Cutter gave a single nod, like it was the final page of a book he'd never meant to keep reading. You all right? She asked. Fine. He looked out toward the horizon. That part of it was dead long before today. Clara glanced down at the child, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, apple still clutched in her tiny fist. Do we tell her? She asked softly. Someday. When she's older. When she asks why your face is the way it is. Why she was born out here, in a cabin built by a man who used to be a ghost. And what will we say? We'll tell her the truth, he said. That you came out of fire and lived. That you found something better than what they tried to steal. That. Scars don't mean shame. They mean survival. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. Let that settle in her chest. Then she handed him their daughter, who shifted in her sleep but didn't wake. Samuel cradled the girl against his shoulder, big hands impossibly gentle. She looks like you, he murmured. She's got your quiet. Clara said, God help us both. They laughed. Behind them, the cabin glowed with warm firelight and the smell of bread cooling on the sill. The mule brayed from the barn, and somewhere far off, an owl called once. Low and lonely, Cutter looked. Out again at the snow-capped peaks. At the trails he'd once walked alone. The land was still rough. Still wild. But he didn't fear it now that he had something worth protecting. Someone worth sharing it with. And somewhere inside the silence, the mountains whispered back, not with wind or storms or ghosts, but with peace. Years later, when their daughter stood on the chapel steps wearing a dress she'd sewn herself, a boy from town trembling as he took her hand, Clara touched the edge of her own scar. Not to hide it. Not anymore. Just to remember. And when the preacher asked who gave the bride, Samuel Cutter stood tall from the front pew and said in a voice as steady as the mountain, I do.